The Library of Alexandria exists in the modern imagination as a ghost, an institution defined not by its life, but by its catastrophic end. It is, perhaps, the most famous library in history, but it is most famous for its burning. The popular narrative is one of unparalleled tragedy, the single greatest accumulation of human knowledge in the ancient world. A vast repository holding anywhere from 40,000 to 400,000 priceless papyrus scrolls, all lost to a single all-consuming fire. This infamous destruction has been lamented for ages as a pivotal, devastating loss for human civilization. This powerful myth, however, has obscured a far more complex and profound reality. The obsession with the library's end has eclipsed the story of its revolutionary life. The central mystery of the Library of Alexandria is not, as popular history would suggest, a simple whodunit. The list of suspects is long, with blame assigned variously to Julius Caesar, a frenzied Christian mob, or the Caliph Omar. But the pursuit of a single culprit for a single fire is a hunt for a phantom. Scholarly consensus confirms that the popular story is, in fact, a myth. The Library of Alexandria was not one singular building, and it was not destroyed by one singular fire. Its disappearance was not a sudden event, but a slow and complex process of gradual decline, a dwindling membership over many centuries, and a series of distinct, devastating events. The institution that we mourn is what scholar Roger S. Bagnall has termed the Library of Dreams. The idea of a perfect, universal archive and its dramatic loss has become a powerful symbol, a dream onto which we project all of an _scene_wisdom. The true story of the library is not about a building that burned, but about an idea that was born, flourished, and ultimately transformed. To understand its legacy, one must first excavate the real library from the ashes of its myth. The investigation must shift from what was lost to what it truly was, and how its existence fundamentally altered the course of human knowledge. The library's story begins not with a book, but with a city and an empire. Alexandria itself was a product of immense ambition. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, following Alexander's untimely death, his vast empire fractured. His general, Ptolemy, the first Sota, seized the wealthiest prize, Egypt. This marked the dawn of the Hellenistic age. The Ptolemies were now Macedonian Greeks ruling over an ancient Egyptian populace, and they faced a critical challenge. They needed to legitimize their dynasty. Their solution was a brilliant act of state policy, a project of cultural dominance. The Library of Alexandria was not a humble public works project. It was a dynastic instrument fostered by the Ptolemaic dynasty. Hellenistic monarchs of this era were fervently competitive in a ruthless contest for political and cultural dominance. They wielded scholastic patronage as a weapon to outshine their opponents. Ptolemy I dreamt of making his new capital, Alexandria, the epicenter of knowledge and culture, supplanting established centers like Athens. The library was a statement of monumental giantism, an expression of power on the same scale as the city's other wonder, the Pharos Lighthouse. It was built to prove, to a rival world, that Alexandria was the true center of the world. Ptolemy I Soter had the vision and the wealth, but the specific blueprint for this cultural weapon came from an exiled Athenian statesman, Demetrius of around 295 BCE. Demetrius, a student of Aristotle who brought the Athenian model of scholarship to the fertile ground of Egyptian wealth, proposed the creation of a universal library. The goal was unprecedented in its scope and scale: to create a repository of all knowledge. While Ptolemy I laid the foundation, the institution itself was likely not built until the reign of his son, Ptolemy II. This grand ambition was made possible by a singular geopolitical advantage. Egypt was the ideal habitat for the papyrus plant, giving the Ptolemies a virtual monopoly on the raw material of books. This abundant supply of what was, at the time, the world's primary writing material gave Alexandria an economic and material advantage that no rival, like the library at Pergamon, could match. The greatest accumulation of knowledge in history was, therefore, a resource-driven enterprise. With the institution founded, the Ptolemies embarked on an aggressive, state-funded mission to acquire all books of all peoples of the earth. Their methods reveal a policy of intellectual piracy and raw imperial power. Two anecdotes, reported by later writers, illustrate this strategy perfectly. The first was the book's From Ship's Policy, decreed by Ptolemy II. Any book found on any ship that docked in Alexandria's bustling harbor was obliged to surrender its texts. These books were transcribed by official scribes, but with a stunning catch. The original scroll was kept for the library, and the copy was returned to the owner. These confiscated originals were then meticulously catalogued and marked with the designation "From the Ships." The second anecdote is even more brazen. Ptolemy III coveted the official, master copies of the great Athenian playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. These priceless texts were safeguarded in the Athenian state archives and were forbidden to be lent out. Ptolemy, however, persuaded the governors of Athens to let him borrow them for copying, in exchange for an enormous sum of 15 talents of silver as a security deposit. Once he had the scrolls, Ptolemy III kept the original texts and sent back magnificent new copies, willingly forfeiting the 15-talent pledge. These were not the actions of a gentle book lover. This was intellectual confiscation. It was a demonstration that Alexandria's wealth and power could, by force or by fine, seize the cultural heritage of the entire known world. The goal was not just to read, but to possess. It was an act of incorporating knowledge into the cognitive empire. The Great Library, as it is remembered, was not a standalone entity. It was the central component of a larger research institution, called the Mauseon, a shrine of the Muses. This was a temple of learning, modeled on Athenian philosophical schools, but with a revolutionary difference. It was a state-funded research center. This was the invention of professional scholarship. The Ptolemies poached the greatest minds of the Hellenistic world, offering Tim a large salary, free food and lodging, and, crucially, exemption from taxes. This community, or synodos, which numbered between 30 and 50 scholars at its height, was freed from the burdens of everyday life to devote itself entirely to intellectual pursuits. The structure of the Mauseon, as described by the geographer Strabo, was designed for intellectual collaboration. It featured a roofed walkway, an arcade of seats for discussion, and a communal dining room where scholars shared meals and ideas. The complex also included lecture halls, gardens, and possibly even a zoo for the study of exotic animals. This represented a shift towards a more secular appreciation of art and science. The Ptolemies were not just collecting books. They were collecting brains and building a factory for the production of new knowledge. This factory soon faced a new and unprecedented problem: information overload. With a collection swelling towards an estimated 400,000 or even 700,000 scrolls, the simple act of finding a text became a monumental challenge. The library's first librarian, Zenodotus of Ephesus, began a rudimentary organization system, assigning texts 2 different rooms based on their subject and attaching a small dangling tag to each scroll with author, title, and subject. This foundational work was perfected by the poet and scholar Calimachus. His masterpiece, the Pinae, or Tables, was a lost bibliographic survey of all Greek literature that reportedly spanned 120 volumes. This work is popularly considered to be the first library catalog in the West. The Pinae represents a monumental cognitive shift. It was not merely a list, it was the invention of bibliography and the imposition of a logical, searchable structure onto the totality of human thought. Callimachus's system divided works into genera such as rhetoric, law, epic, and tragedion, then listed authors alphabetically within each category. Most importantly, each entry contained metadata, a short author biography, their father's name, their teachers, a full list of their known works, the first line of the work, and the total number of lines in the document. This system was a vital reference tool. With it, a library patron could find out if the library contained a work by a particular author, how it was categorized, and where it might be found. Before Callimachus, knowledge was a chaotic scene. The Pinae provided the map. In creating it, Callimachus invented the discipline of information science and paved the way for every library catalog, database, and search engine that would follow. He turned a collection of books into a true, functional library. The Mausian was not a passive archive. It was an active laboratory. The most famous example of its function is the work of Eratosthenes of Cyrene, a geographer and a poet who served as head librarian. The story begins with archival research. Eratosthenes, working in the library, heard about a famous well in the southern city of Syene, modern Aswan. The report, likely found on a papyrus scroll, noted a curious phenomenon. At noon on the summer solstice, the sun shined directly to the bottom of the well, casting no shadow. Eratosthenes understood the implication. He then moved from research to empirical science. In Alexandria, on the exact same day and at the exact same time, he erected a pole. A nominand observed that it did cast a shadow. This was the key. The sun's rays were parallel, so the shadow could only be caused by the Earth's curvature. He measured the angle of the shadow and found it to be 7.2 degrees, which is precisely 1/50th of a 360-degree circle. The next piece of data he needed was the distance between the two cities. He consulted the library's resources and found the measurement, recorded by professional Bemetist surveyors, to be 5,000 stadia. The calculation was simple. If the distance of 5,000 stadia was 1/50th of the full circle, the total circumference was 5,000 multiplied by 50, or 250,000 stadia. This calculation of the Earth's circumference was astoundingly accurate and remarkably close to today's measurement. This was the ultimate expression of the Mausian's purpose, a perfect synthesis of archival research and scientific experimentation that, for the first time, measured the planet. Eratosthenes was not alone. The halls of the Mausian were home to a staggering concentration of genius. Euclid founded there a school of mathematics and composed his Elements, the text that would define geometry for over 2 millennia. Hero of Alexandria, working later in the same tradition, invented the first recorded steam engine. But the story of the Mausian is also a human one, and its scholars were not infallible. A tragic counterpoint to Eratosthenes' success is the story of Aristarchus of Samos. Working at Alexandria, Aristarchus presented the first known heliocentric model. He proposed that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but that it revolved around the sun. This was nearly 1,800 years before Copernicus. Aristarchus's revolutionary idea was often rejected in favor of the geocentric theories of Aristotle and Ptolemy. The reasons were entirely human. First, it was counterintuitive. As one philosopher argued, we cannot feel this motion. Second, his model did not, at the time, predict planetary movements with any more accuracy than the established geocentric model. Third, to account for the fact that the stars did not appear to shift their position as the Earth moved, the problem of stellar parallel. Aristarchus had to hypothesize that the stars were so great a distance away that the Earth's orbit was a comparatively tiny point. This almost infinite universe was a philosophical step too far for his contemporaries. This tantalizing loss provides a crucial, humanizing lesson. The library was not a magical font of absolute truth. It was a human institution, subject to cognitive bias and intellectual limits. Its purpose was not to receive revelation, but to foster debate, and in that debate, it was, at times, profoundly wrong. The library's most world-changing achievement may have been a project of translation. While dominated by Greek works, the library also collected the knowledge of other cultures, including a large section of Egyptian and Jewish texts. The most significant of these projects was the Septuagint, the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Koine Greek. A powerful legend, originating in the letter of Aristides, surrounds its creation. The letter claims that Ptolemy II, desiring the Jewish law for his library, requested 72 scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. They were brought to Alexandria, placed in separate chambers, and, in 72 days, miraculously produced 72 identical translations. Scholars today agree that this story is fictitious, a piece of propaganda to establish the translation's authority. The real motives for the translation were twofold. First, it served Ptolemaic imperial strategy to collect and incorporate the legal and sacred texts of every people. Second, and more practically, The large, Hellenized Jewish community in Alexandria no longer understood Hebrew. The Septuagint satisfied a need in the Jewish community for a scripture in the lingua franca of their world. The impact of this translation was incalculable. It helped to spread among the Gentiles the idea of the Messiah. It became the primary scripture for the nascent Christian faith. The translation process itself fused Hebrew theology with Greek philosophical concepts. Terms like the logos, or the word, were used to translate Hebrew concepts, a Hellenistic synthesis that would become the absolute bedrock of Christian theology. Most famously in the opening of the Gospel of John, the Library of Alexandria, in its ambitious quest to collect all knowledge, became the crucible where the intellectual foundations of Western religion were forged. We return to the central mystery, the destruction. We have the suspects are the Christians, the Arabs, but the investigation reveals that the library's end was not a single, dramatic murder. It was a gradual decline over the course of several centuries. The Library of Dreams burned in a single inferno. The real library died a slow death of 1,000 cuts, beginning with a lack of funding and support and dwindling membership. The library's decline began not with an external fire, but with an internal purge. In 145 BCE, the ruler, Ptolemy VIII, Phiscon, in a fit of political brutality, purged into Selexios. From Alexandria, the head librarian Aristarchus of Samothrace fled into exile. This expulsion brought about a shift in the history of Hellenistic scholarship. This was the first true blow. The library's genius was never the scrolls. It was the scholars. The community synodos that lived, ate, and argued in the Mauseon was the institution's living heart. When the political climate turned toxic, that community was broken. The scrolls remained, but the knowledge factory had its power cut. The first of our famous suspects arrives a century later. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar, in pursuit of his rival Pompey, became embroiled in the Alexandrian War. Besieged in the harbor, he ordered the boats in the harbor to be set on fire. This drastic measure was a military necessity. The fire, fanned by the wind, spread from the dockyards and destroyed the great library. Or did it? The case is complex. Caesar himself, in his account of the war, admits to burning the fleet but left out the destruction of the library. The first writer to explicitly claim the great library Emegale Bibliotheke was destroyed is Plutarch, writing over 150 years after the event. The scholarly consensus points to a different target. The fire did happen, but it likely destroyed the docks and the storehouses. These warehouses, or apothecae, were used to store goods, including, according to the Roman philosopher Seneca, 40,000 books. These were almost certainly the scrolls confiscated from the ships that were awaiting the long process of being catalogued and moved to the main library. The verdict: Caesar is guilty, but of burning a massive number of scrolls in dockside storage, not of destroying the main royal library. The proof: the geographer Strabo mentions having visited the Mauseon in around 20 BC. Strabo was in Alexandria nearly 30 years after Caesar's fire. The heart of the library was still beating. After Caesar, the library entered its long twilight. It dwindled during the Roman period. The new Roman masters had less interest in funding the Ptolemies' grand project. Patronage dried up. The Alexandrian scholarship of this era became known for pedantry, monotony, and lack of originality. The last known references to scholars being active members of the Mauseon date to the 260s CE. The institution was a hollow shell. The actual death blow came not with a famous philosopher, but with a soldier. In 272 CE, the Emperor Aurelian fought to recapture the city of Alexandria from the forces of the Palmyrene queen Zenobia. In the course of this brutal urban warfare, Aurelian's forces destroyed the Brauchian quarter of the city. The Brauchian was the royal quarter, the exact location of the main library, and the Mauseon. This is the actual end of the great library. There is no dramatic legend, no famous villain, no philosophical debate. The Mauseon and its library were almost certainly a memory after this war. It was destroyed as unglamorous collateral damage in a Roman civil war, having already faded into This is the real tragedy. Not a sudden blaze of glory, but a slow fade followed by a violent, anonymous end. The second suspect is a case of mistaken identity. This event absolutely happened, but it involves the other library, the daughter branch established in the Temple of Serapis. This branch, located in a different part of the city, had survived the 272 CE war. In 391 CE, the Roman Empire was now Christian. Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree sanctioning the demolition of temples in Alexandria. Empowered by the state, the Bishop of Alexandria, Theophilus, led an attack on the Serapeum. His frenzied followers stormed the temple, which pagans had been using as a stronghold, and demolished it, giving the first blow to the cult statue of Serapis. A Christian mob did destroy a library that day, but it was the daughter library, and their motive was religious, not anti. They were attacking a temple, a symbol of paganism. Furthermore, contemporary accounts from the historian Ammianus Marcellinus suggest that by 391 CE, the Serapeum's library may not have had any books left in it. This documented destruction of the Serapeum has been conflated over the centuries with the mythical burning of the Great Library, which had already been gone for 120 years. The final suspect is responsible for the most famous story, and the most fictitious. In 642 CE, the Arab army under Amr ibn Alas captured Alexandria. According to the legend, the commander asked Caliph Omar what to do with the books. Omar gave the chilling, oft-quoted reply, "If there is in it what complies with the book of God, ... it is not needed. If what is in these books contradict there is no need for it. Proceed in destroying them." The scrolls, the story goes, were then distributed to the city's bathhouses and used as fuel for 6 months. This powerful story is largely a myth. It is pure folklore. The earliest source for this story comes from the 13th century writer Barhib. It appears 600 years after the event it describes. Scholars consider it a fanciful adaptation of propaganda. The verdict is simple. When the Arabs arrived in 642 CE, there was no great library to burn. The royal library had been rubble for 370 years. The Serapeum had been destroyed for 250. The great library was not destroyed by one fire, but by at least 3 events over 4 centuries. So what, in the end, was truly lost? The list of tantalizing losses is heartbreaking. It includes the complete 120-volume Pinax of the Babyloniaca, a complete history of Babylon by the priest the lost second book of Aristotle's Poetics on the nature of comedy, 71 of the 78 plays of 120 of the 127 plays of Sophocles, the 10,000 lines of poetry and the original astronomical works of Aristarchus, which argued the earth revolved around the sun. Yet even this lament is a form of the dream. The scholarly consensus is that most major works, like the philosophies of Plato, existed elsewhere. The very function of the library, and others like it, was to copy and disseminate texts. True knowledge is not lost in a fire. It is lost when a civilization stops copying a text. We did not lose advanced technology or alien secrets. The loss was more subtle and more profound. As historian Garrett Ryan notes, what perished were overwhelmingly lesser-known works of literature and philosophy, commentaries and monographs, all the residue and introspection of an extremely sophisticated literary culture. We did not lose the Iliad, but we lost Zenodotus's definitive, critical edition of the Iliad. We lost the footnotes. We lost the drafts. We lost the context of a civilization. That is the real, unrecoverable loss. The idea of the library, however, proved indestructible. The scholars expelled by Ptolemy VIII in 145 BCE scattered across the Mediterranean, taking their knowledge with them. The surviving material that had been copied and disseminated from Alexandria was preserved in other great centers, like the Imperial Library of Constantinople. The true intellectual heir to Alexandria, however, arose in the 8th century, in a new capital, Baghdad. This brings us to the ultimate historical irony. While the fictional Caliph, Omar, is blamed for the library's death, the real heirs to its mission were the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. The House of Wisdom, or Beit el-Hikmah, was inspired by the ancient Museum of Alexandria. It launched a great translation movement, a massive, state-sponsored effort to translate the Greek texts of Euclid, Ptolemy, Aristotle, and Galen into Arabic. This knowledge, saved from oblivion and curated by Baghdad, was later rediscovered by Europeans, often through libraries in Moorish Spain. The light of the ancient world was not passed directly to the European Renaissance. It was saved, refined, and returned by the Islamic world. The story ends where it began, on the shores of the Mediterranean. In 2002, a new library, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, was officially inaugurated. It stands on roughly the same site as its ancient predecessor. Its architecture is pure, breathtaking symbolism. The main building is a giant tilted disc, an academic powerhouse representing the sun rising over the Mediterranean. Its massive, curved granite wall is carved with every known alphabet in the world. Inside, its vast, open reading room emphasizes openness, light, and accessibility. The mission of this new library is to revivify the spirit of the old, but that spirit has evolved. The ancient library was an imperial project, a fortress of knowledge designed to hoard books and consolidate power. The new library is a major cultural hub, a symbol of unity and dialogue that hosts over 1,500 programs a year for 1 million visitors. It is a window to the world for Egypt, and a window to Egypt for the world. The ancient dream of the Library of Alexandria was to contain all the world's knowledge. The new, modern dream is to connect it. The spirit of that ancient institution is not found in the phantom archive of what was lost, but in the living, breathing work of connection, dialogue, and discovery that continues on its shores today.